Hi everyone, my name is Peter Billman, and today I'll be presenting some preliminary findings regarding our research titled Peril or Perseverance: How Climate Affects the Past, Present, and Future Distributions of American Pikas in the Southern Rocky Mountains. I'll be covering 5 main topics in today's presentation. First, I'll go over some background on pikas and their ecology. Next, I'll go over how past climate change has shaped where pikas have lived. Then I'll be discussing what we know about how the current climate of the ecoregion is shaping where pikas live at. Then I'll discuss some of our findings regarding how pikas may respond to further climate change in the upcoming decades. And lastly, I'll wrap up with a few conclusion slides and take-home messages. Alright, getting into it. So dipping into the evolution of American pikas, pikas are a type of lagomorph, which encompasses 2 different orders, Leporidae as well as Ochitonidae. So Leporidae is made up of both rabbits and hares, whereas Ochitonidae is made up of pikas. There are about twice as many species of rabbits and hares globally as there are pika species. So pikas first appeared in Asia, based on the fossil record. Then they spread to Europe and North America. Some extinct species even occupied as far as southern Africa millions of years ago. The 2 North American species, so the American pika as well as the collared pika up in Alaska and Canada, split about 8.9 million years ago. And so throughout evolutionary time periods, rabbits and hares seem to benefit and expand globally during warmer periods of climate, whereas pikas tend to contract during warmer periods of climate. So moving forward, we're only going to be discussing the American pika. So these pikas only weigh about 150 to 200 grams, which is about the equivalent of 1 cup of sugar. The species is a habitat specialist, meaning that it can only really live in one or a couple different types of habitat, which is going to be those talus slopes usually. However, they are a dietary generalist, meaning that they can eat most grasses and forbs that live around them. They're not restricted to just 1 or 2. Pikas are considered a cold-adapted species, meaning that they prefer these cold temperatures. They do really well in the winter. However, they don't really like these really warm, hot temperatures in the summer. They are very, very well adapted to winter underneath the snow, and so they're just running around all winter long in the dark. They do not hibernate like marmots do. They're likely too small to actually build up the fat reserves to be able to hibernate. And so all summer long, these pikas are running around the talus slopes, which you may have seen before, building their little hay piles so they can consume those hay piles throughout the winter. One fun fact is that pikas actually live in every western state currently, in the lower 48 except for Arizona. Here's just a few cute little photos of pikas. As you can see on the right, those pikas are picking grasses and forbs to bring back to their hay piles. This photo shows some prime habitat in southern Wyoming in the Medicine Bow Mountains just west of Laramie. As you can see, there's an abundance of broken rock / talus habitat for them to occupy. There's a lot of moisture and plants available to them. And given that this photo was taken in August, we can assume that the area gets a lot of snow in the winter, and then that lasts through much of the mild summers. These are some of the evidences that we look for when out surveying for pikas. So the photo on the left shows some fecal pellets, and so pikas tend to defecate in the same place over and over again, creating these little latrines that we can find. And then the photo on the right shows an active hay pile, so there's a lot of fresh, clipped vegetation stored underneath that boulder. So that tells us that there's currently a pika here, and it's storing up vegetation getting ready for this upcoming winter. So now hopping into what we know about how past climate and climate change has impacted pikas and where they live. Multiple studies that use the fossil record, typically from caves, have found that cooler, wetter climates that pikas require were much more widespread during and after the last ice age, at least in the US, given that Canada was mostly under ice. Further, one of these studies, the figure on the right, modeled the temperatures during which pikas could be active in the day, and found that those temperatures were occurring throughout nearly the entire western United States during the last ice age. However, pikas are no longer able to occupy these low elevations that were once occupiable in the right-hand map, given increases in past temperatures that occurred since the last ice age. So this all may now provide us with some clues regarding how future climatic shifts may impact where the species moves to in the future. So let's now dig into what we know about how current climate and recent climate change has been shaping where pikas live at currently. So one cool thing to know about pikas is that the aspects of climate that determine where they can live at appear to differ depending on which ecoregion we are actually in. So some of my own work in the Northern Rockies in Montana and Idaho found that summer and winter temperatures appear to be the factors that most strongly predict where they can live. However, in Nevada, Oregon, and California, some studies have found that summer temperatures and food quality, so grasses and forbs, determine where they can live at. And then lastly, a different study in Washington state found that snowpack and moisture were the most important factors for pikas. So this all kind of encourages us to look at more of an ecoregional scale as opposed to a range-wide scale. We don't want to look across the entire western US to look at which climate factor determines where they live. We want to look within the ecoregions. So speaking of ecoregions, let's dig into which climatic factors influence pika distribution in the Southern Rocky ecoregion specifically. The Southern Rockies span across 4 different states, primarily Colorado, but also northern New Mexico, a little bit of eastern Utah, as well as southern Wyoming. So for this work, we are investigating 4 primary climatic stressors that are known to affect pikas. So first of all, we have heat stress, so we know that high temperatures are typically harmful to pikas. We also have cold stress, so low temperatures in the absence of snow can cause cold stress to the individuals. Next, we have summer rainfall, so we think that summer rainfall may impact pikas indirectly by changing their food quality. And then lastly, winter snowpack, we know that pikas require a lot of snow for that thermal insulation during the winter. In my own work here, I'm covering actually 3 different species. So on the left-hand map, we have American pikas and their range where they live. In the middle, we have yellow-bellied marmots. And on the right-hand side, we have bushy-tailed wood rats. So as you can see in the Southern Rockies, which is bounded by the boxes there, these species are pretty heavily overlapping across the entire western US and Canada, but especially in the Southern Rockies. So I'm kind of interested in how these 3 species might be affected by climate change separately and what impact they may have on each other. When out conducting some of our field surveys, we can look for multiple different signs of evidence that these animals are there. So first, we of course have the visual and auditory signals that they're there, so pikas and marmots of course are going to call out and we may see them running around. However, wood rats are nocturnal, so we never will actually see them usually. Second of all, we can look for scat, and so we can look for fresh fecal pellets to tell us that the animals are actually there right now. And lastly, we can look for some sort of indirect evidence, such as these hay piles, or marmot dens, or wood rat nests in the bottom right corner there. All of these signs tell us whether or not the animals may be active there. This map here shows our sampling scheme. So across the Southern Rockies, we are surveying each of these red different dots, which represents a different talus patch. So far we have 22 elevational gradients of patches that we have surveyed so far, and we'll be surveying a couple more in 2024. So this is an example zooming in here, just in one watershed just west of Denver. This is up in Guanella Pass. So this area you can see kind of how we surveyed from high to low elevations along all these different patches on this gradient. So this watershed specifically actually spanned about 4,500 feet in elevation, even though it doesn't look like it's that much. And so surveying each of these sites, we can tell where the animals are now and where they used to be in the past. Each of our elevational transects included about 8 to 12 elevationally distributed talus patches, which typically spanned from hot and dry conditions down low to colder and wetter climates up high. So these 4 photos just show some of the diversity in climates that we actually surveyed. So now hopping into some of our preliminary results. Looking into pikas first, we see that out of the 204 patches that we've surveyed so far, 46% of those were occupied by pikas, 35% were extirpated or locally extinct, and then 19% were no evidence patches, suggesting that pikas have not been there anytime in recent history. Next, moving to the marmots, we found marmots at about 1/3 of all the sites that we visited. And then next, wood rats, we found wood rats at about 41% of all the sites that we had visited, and so quite abundant across the region. Just looking into the sites now that pikas no longer live at, we can see that out of all of those sites, wood rats already occupy about 64% of them. And I should note here that pikas and wood rats were only found to coexist at 4 sites total, suggesting that they're typically not in the same place at the same time. So what this tells us is that wood rats appear to move in once pikas are gone. So what do these results actually look like elevationally? So with this first plot here, we can see that pikas are typically occupying these higher elevation sites and not the lower elevation sites. Next, we get into marmots, which exhibit pretty much the same pattern. Marmots are frequently occupying the higher elevation sites, but not the lower elevation sites. Lastly, we see wood rats actually have the opposite pattern, where they're typically occupying the low elevation sites, but not the high elevation sites. This again tells us that there might be some competition going on between pikas and wood rats, or marmots and wood rats, because they're typically not in the same place at the same time. Focusing just on pikas again, these are the 22 different watersheds that we've surveyed so far. The colored bars represent where pikas are currently occupying, so the elevations where we currently find pikas, whereas the gray bars represent elevations in those watersheds where we no longer find pikas, but they once lived there. And so this color gradient is actually on a scale from green, the darkest green being where there's been no upslope retractions yet, and then the yellow is where more than 50% of the watershed has retracted upslope. And so notice the first bar or the first watershed there, that is actually the transect up in southern Wyoming. So it's an incredibly cold and wet mountain range where we found pikas at the lowest elevation sites. However, once we get into Colorado, typically the lowest elevation that we're finding pikas at is 9,000 plus feet. And then also notice the two bars on the right-hand side. Those are the Greenhorn Mountains as well as the Abajo Range over in Utah. Those two mountain ranges were surveyed to look for the presence of wood rats and marmots in the absence of pikas. We knew that there wasn't pikas there, so we wanted to see if in the absence of pikas, those species are still occupying the highest elevation sites. So now for the fun part. I promise this isn't as complex as it all looks here. So here we created a structural equation model diagram to summarize some of the statistical results. All the arrows here indicate hypothesized causal relationships. The red arrows mean that it was a significant and negative relationship, whereas the blue arrows mean that the relationships were significant and positive. The gray arrows were relationships that were not significant at all. So let's go through species by species here real quick. So on the left-hand side we have marmots. So marmots were not affected by the minimum temperature in winter, but were strongly negatively affected by mean summer temperatures. In addition, they were not affected by summer rainfall, but they were positively affected by snowpack. So if there was more snow in an area, there was more likely to be marmots there. Next, onto the pikas in the middle. Again, there was no effective minimum temperature in the winter, and that may be because they are underneath the snow all winter long. However, summer mean temperature did have a large negative effect on pikas and where they could live at. And then we get into precipitation, which again in summertime for some reason had this strange negative relationship. We don't understand why that might be. We think it might be an artifact of some of the sampling in mountain ranges where there weren't pikas, but this diagram suggests that the relationship between pikas and rainfall is actually negative in the summer, so more rain is bad. And then lastly, we have snowpack. So snowpack in the winter had a positive effect on pikas, so more snow, more likely to be pikas. We also tested the effect of patch size or habitat size on pikas because we know from other studies that larger patches typically remain occupied through time. However, we found that the amount of talus or the patch size had no effect on where pikas were after controlling for these other climatic factors, suggesting that climate alone is the most important factors for where pikas are living. And then lastly, we now get into wood rats. So wood rats appear to benefit from warmer summer temperatures. However, even more so than that, they're negatively affected on pikas, or by pikas. So where we find pikas, we don't find wood rats. And so this suggests that there's competitive exclusion going on. So pikas are essentially kind of kicking out or keeping out wood rats for one reason or another. So now how can we use all of this information to predict how pikas will respond to future climate change moving forward? To investigate this further, we created a species distribution model to identify where the climate is currently suitable for pikas across the Southern Rockies ecoregion. So this map on the left-hand side, note the star here is the approximate location of Denver. In this map, we see that darker colors represent areas that are climatically suitable for pikas. So let's use some climate forecasting to look at kind of some reasonable pathways of what future climate change might entail. So using the SSP 245 pathway, which is kind of our current emissions, let's see what pika distributions look like by 2040. So this map suggests that we do see a decent amount of contraction going on in the suitable climate across the ecoregion. So some of the areas that were historically suitable, or currently suitable I should say, such as a lot of the San Juans in southwestern Colorado, become far less suitable in the future. And so in total, we see a 74% loss of suitable climate in the ecoregion. And then projected out to 2061, we see an 84% loss compared to today. And so we see again the San Juans in southwestern Colorado take a really big hit, and some other areas seem to be kind of losing climate suitability. There are a few areas in particular that we might want to look at. So the greatest large area vulnerability or area of loss moving forward appears to be the San Juans. Notice how it goes from a really dark blue in our current present map, suggesting high climate suitability currently. However, even within 20 years from now, the climate is not predicted to be as suitable or really suitable at all for the species. Note also the La Salles in Utah, right by Moab there. That mountain range appears to no longer be suitable by 2061. We see a very similar story with parts of northern New Mexico, so the Jemez Mountains, and over by Santa Fe. Those mountains were historically / currently occupiable and had pretty suitable climates. Note the dark blue colors on the left-hand map versus the right-hand map. Those suitable climates disappear mostly. However, some of the good news is that some of the areas such as the Front Range and parts of central Colorado appear to be possible long-term climate refugium. That just means that climate likely will remain suitable moving forward through at least 2060 to 2080. At least that's what these models suggest. While a 74% to an 84% loss of climate suitability moving forward seems all doom and gloom, we should acknowledge that species distribution models use broad-scale climate projections, but typically do not robustly predict very fine-scale future distributions of climate. Thus, these projections may slightly overestimate losses of suitable climate. For example, microclimates, which are defined as areas where the fine-scale climate is different from the broader scale or larger scale climate patterns, are being overlooked. One such case is where there's permanent ice underneath the talus, which may keep the talus gaps cool for pikas well into the future. However, things like that are not able to be incorporated into these SDMs at such a large scale. In addition, habitat connectivity may also play an important role moving forward in helping populations recolonize habitats which went locally extinct. And so if there's high connectivity, pikas can recolonize a patch if it's randomly lost. However, connectivity in and of itself cannot prevent future distributional changes forever. And then lastly, these SDM models do not take into account evolution. And so rapid and strong selection pressures may select for individual pikas over space and time that have genetic adaptations that allow them to withstand higher temperatures. We haven't necessarily seen evidence of this quite yet, but it is a possibility. And so this microgeographic adaptation may provide a glimmer of hope in certain regions. Now wrapping it all up with some concluding statements. Revisiting some of our conclusions here, these are kind of our take-homes. So the occupancy results showed, this is all of our surveys, that pikas are no longer occupying most of the areas across the Southern Rockies below 9,000 feet. And so they've been experiencing pretty widespread upslope retractions, ecoregion-wide. However, one species appears to be benefiting from pikas kind of losing with climate change, and that's wood rats. So once pikas are gone, wood rats appear to move into those sites rather quickly. The structural equation model, that again was the figure that had all the lines going everywhere, it looked pretty hectic. That again showed us that pikas were negatively influenced by summer temperatures, but positively influenced by snowpack. So areas that were cold and had a lot of snow were really suitable for pikas. And in marmots, we found the exact same thing. Summer temperature had a negative effect, and more snow had a positive effect. However, with wood rats, we could almost predict exactly where wood rats would be based on the presence or absence of pikas. And so if pikas were present, wood rats were not. Again, we only found coexistence at about 4 sites. However, warmer summer temperatures also positively benefited wood rats, which is a result that is contrary to previous research, and we need to investigate a little bit further here. So the SDMs, the maps, the species distribution models suggested a 74 to 84% loss of climate suitability in the ecoregion by those different time periods. Remember, there are those caveats to take with that, but we do think that these losses are primarily due to increases in summer temperature and decreases in snowpack. Nearly all global models on climate change moving forward predict that snowpack in the mid-latitudes, such as the Southern Rockies, will decrease through time, and we will be experiencing more rain in the wintertime. So that'll have a huge effect on both pikas and marmots. And then lastly, what's going on with these other talus-dwelling species? So we mostly focus on pikas, but a little bit on wood rats and marmots. So what these results suggest is that wood rats will continue moving upslope as pikas are losing with climate change. So pikas will go extinct in certain areas, and then wood rats will be able to move in, so wood rats will technically benefit. At least that's what this is suggesting. However, we really don't know what's going on with the marmots, so we didn't really get a lot of results here. Only about 1/3 of our sites that we surveyed had marmots present. What we do know is that summer temperature had a negative impact, and then more snow had a positive impact, which is kind of corroborated by some of these other studies that we've seen on the species. And so there's a lot of cool work on marmots, if you guys are interested, going on at Rocky Mountain Biological Laboratory over by Crested Butte that you can look into. But as for this research here, we really didn't get a lot of information on what's going on with the marmots. Just to leave everybody with one of my favorite quotes, "Every species is a masterpiece, exquisitely adapted to the particular environment in which it has survived. Who are we to destroy or even diminish biodiversity? This was from the famous E.O. Wilson. So with that said, a huge thank you to everybody here. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out. That's my email right there, peter.billman@uconn.edu. There's also my website, it's just peterbillman.com. However, we really wanted to extend an additional thank you to everybody who's ever submitted any sort of geotagged observation of pikas to iNaturalist, either the app on their phone or the website. So species distribution models like the ones that we have done here, these maps, would not be possible to do without this extensive data across the entire ecoregion. We can't just go out and sample thousands of patches on our own. So having folks in the public, like you guys, doing some of these observations, documenting where you see pikas, where you see marmots, where you see wood rats, is incredibly beneficial to us to help understand what is going to happen with the species moving forward. With that said, I'd like to make an additional push to folks. If you have any data on marmot observations or wood rat observations, we would also love to extract those from iNaturalist as well. So we encourage folks to keep using that. Use the Pika Patrol app, things like that. And so these records are incredibly helpful to us to make these maps better moving forward, to help understand more accurately what kind of will be the situation with these species moving forward. So again, thank you, and feel free to reach out with any questions.